haven't shared this story before is because I don't feel like it's inspirational. When you go online and you look for convert stories, usually people are looking for something really inspirational. They're going to cry during watching it and they're going to leave with a really uplifted feeling. I can't really promise any of that. It was slow and it was long and it's been going on, for the last 7 years, I guess. So yeah, this is a story. From a very early age, I remember not believing in God and being quite certain about that. I was exposed to religion in the sense that people around me were religious, but, in a very Church of England kind of way, in a very I've mentioned it before, in the UK, we tend not to speak about religion. There's it's on a range of subjects that we don't tend to talk about in very polite society, it's not like for polite conversation, because people can get heated and get emotional about it and things. So I wasn't exposed to very direct people practicing religion. So there's a difference between having faith and then actually practicing religion. But when I was very young, I remember going to Sunday school, maybe when I was like 4 or 5 years old. We have this thing in the UK, Sunday school tends to happen after the church service. You go along to the church as children and you learn, basic stories from the Bible. And I remember going along to that and really liking that they gave out sweeties while we were having the lessons and things. But I also remember kind of feeling quite strongly that I didn't believe what they were telling me is to be true. And, I might have been influenced, I don't know, I don't remember, but I might have been influenced by other children telling me, oh, God doesn't exist or something like that. But as far as I'm aware, it came from me. When I was in primary school, I remember saying to my mum that I wanted to get christened, because I wasn't christened. I wanted to get christened. Mum was quite surprised by this because, I think maybe she knew how I felt about God or religion and things. But she was happy with that and she was supportive, and she kind of said, well, why? What's brought this on? Why do you want to be christened? And I said, well, because I'm the only one at school who isn't. And that was kind of like, I said it and I realized that wasn't a very good reason to become christened. So we didn't get me christened. So, I already had this mixed feelings and this kind of like almost tumultuous relationship with faith. Being very kind of strong in that I didn't believe in God, and that organized religion is a whole concept and all of these quite teenage type things. And then despite that, when I was about 14 or 15, I remember very clearly going through a stage. It wasn't a short stage, it went on for quite a long time, where I started actively speaking to God in no real capacity. And the thing is that I grew up thinking of God as a man in the sky with a staff, the Simpsons picture of God. That's kind of how I saw God. I started to speak to God, but it wasn't God. I didn't give it a name. I didn't give it any kind of thing. It was just, I didn't think of it further than that. I was just talking to something and finding comfort in something. And I was kind of interested in pursuing that, but I didn't really know how to. And then I remember I spoke to a friend about it once, and he really laughed at me, like, what are you talking about? Suddenly you believe in God? Like, what is this? Then I met my husband, my now husband. And it was a real shock to me because I didn't know that he was Muslim when I first met him. There was nothing about him to tell me that he was Muslim. I served him bacon and he very kindly refused to eat it, and I didn't really know why he didn't want to eat bacon, but it didn't cross my mind for a second that he might not eat it for religious reasons. And then later on, it came up in conversation in a very natural way, and I was really shocked because I had a perception about Muslims and about Islam, and he did not fit it. He was practicing Muslim and very certain of his belief. He answered any questions that I had, and I had a lot of questions. I wanted to know the answers behind 9/11. I wanted to know the answers behind Boko Haram. I wanted to know the answers behind hijab, because I hated hijab. I wanted to know the answer behind halal meat, because I was certain that this is some kind of torture for animals. And all of these things. And, in a very moderate, in a very thoughtful and calm way. He talked me through everything, every question that I had. He answered them. Okay, well, that's not, you know, it's not quite the impression that I had, but okay, this is interesting. Like, you know, I'm not scared off by him. I'm not scared off by the religion. He's a normal person. He's intelligent. He's living his life in a normal way, and he happens to be Muslim. Okay. I wasn't about to convert, and I was very clear about that, and my husband respected that. And you know, he taught me how to be respectful of all religions as well, because honestly, I wasn't being respectful of any religion. And then I came to Jordan, and that wasn't going to change. I was still very clear that I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not anything. But here in Jordan, it's very hard to say that. So he introduced me as a Christian, and people said Happy Christmas to me and Happy Easter to me, because of course, you know, celebrate all of those events in a cultural way, not in a religious way. I said Happy Eid to them, and everyone was very respectful, and you know, it was all very it was just a lot of mutual respect. But the thing that changed, so the next thing, you know, the first thing was meeting my husband, and then the second thing was that once I was in Jordan and I was surrounded by people practicing faith, whether a Christian faith or Muslim faith, because I was at the time, the first few years that I worked here in Jordan, that I lived here in Jordan, I worked for a Christian organisation. So, you know, I was exposed to religion on a broad sense, and I decided, you know, I have to pursue learning about religion because I'm in a religious country, and because I have married a religious man, and I'm surrounded by people who practice religion. So I started. If we were going to start a family, then I needed to be respectful of my children as well, and you know, be as knowledgeable as I could for their sakes. Even though at the time I still had this really quite immature notion that we wouldn't raise our children with any faith, that they would choose their faith when they grew up and they were old enough to make a decision for themselves, because I didn't want to brainwash our children or something like that. You know, when I look back at that, and I think it's so funny, because it was such a kind of immature way of looking at faith, and it just really showed that I didn't understand what it is to have faith and to practice religion. So every time I came up against a point that it didn't work in my head, I couldn't agree with it, or I just couldn't understand it, then I would go away and I would learn about it, reading the Quran over this period of time, even though being very, very clear that I wasn't converting or anything like that. And you know, I think one of the things with my conversion story is that every stage in this story is punctuated by me overcoming some disbelief that I had. So the first one was God. First one was, I realizing I believe in God. The second one was like, okay, well, do I believe in Jesus? Do I believe in the Prophet Muhammad? Do I believe in, you know, and like this. Someone told me, read the biographies, learn about him within a context. So I read 3 biographies. I read a biography by a Muslim. I read a biography by a historian claiming to be objective, but was very subjective. And not very polite, and I read a third one by a very well-grounded, objective historian. And at the end of these 3 books, I was completely convinced by him. And this is how I learned not just to accept the faith on behalf of, you know, the people around me and respecting the people around me, but I saw the beauty in it. And it was that it made sense. There was no more that needed to be done. I was like, well, I believe in God, and I believe in the Prophet, and I believe in the Quran, and I believe in all the in-between, and everything else that I may struggle with, and I come across verses or things that don't make sense to me and all of these things, and sometimes, you know, you have your doubt, like, wow, does the Quran really say that, or did the Prophet really say that? And then you go away and you read about it and you learn and you put it in context. And you know, it's just a really beautiful thing, and you know, you're never going to finish this journey. So yes, I was convinced, and it was around Christmas 2019 that I finally said the words out loud to my husband. It had been, you know, going around in my mind a lot. I had to come to terms with it myself. It was a huge change to go from really not believing in God at all and then identifying completely as a Muslim. So eventually I came out and I told my husband, and he was so shocked. He just didn't expect it at all. He thought all of the research that I had been doing was purely for the kids' sake. I don't think that he thought for a minute that I was actually in the process of converting. So yeah, when people say like, oh, you converted for your husband, it's really, it couldn't be further from the truth. But yeah, that's the end. So I hope that this was interesting for you in some way. And ma'as salama.